I am so excited to be here for Spilling the Tea. I know some of you guys are able to watch us and some might be listening through the podcast, but if you're watching, you see I am in my fall mustard yellow today for our for our Spilling the Tea. I was like, I'm gonna be festive. I'm gonna wear something that reflects the season. And we have here Dr. Henry, who is also reflecting the season in some vibrant colors as well. So super excited to be here with Dr. Henry today. Dr. Henry, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, it's my pleasure to be here. My name is Racine Henry. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in New York and New Jersey, as well as a professor, wife, mom, cookbook author, and yeah, here.
Cookbook author. My family is lucky if they get 2 good meals from me for the month. Otherwise, DoorDash has become my friend. You hear me? I was like, well, it's healthy. It's from DoorDash.
Believe
So
it.
healthy, right? So
Right.
I wanted to jump right into it. Well, you know what? Before I jump into it, you're a therapist, you're a professor, you're a cookbook author, you're a mom. Tell me which of those identities feel more you, or maybe which identity do you have most enjoyment with on a daily basis?
I get enjoyment from my daughter every day for sure. I think it is a privilege to be able to be her mom. She's amazing and she encourages, oops, sorry about that. She encourages me to be fearless and to be, in the moment. The cookbook is something that is therapeutic as well. Cooking is always therapeutic for me, but I also use cooking when I do couples therapy. So the cookbook is based around psychoeducational exercises you can do by yourself, with your partner, with your family, and the recipes reflect that. So there are things like to eat by myself that are really indulgent, things that I've cooked for my husband throughout our relationship, family recipes, things like that.
Oh, I love it. That is so creative. How did you come
Thank
up with that
you.
idea? That is so creative.
Well, back in grad school, I've always thought about how to combine the two loves of cooking and being a therapist. And I had a classmate who had some experience being in AA, and he would talk to me about the 12 steps of AA and just like how cyclical that was. And it was sort of like an ebb and flow thing as well. And I thought about cooking, serving some of the same um, purpose around allowing people to have this tool through which they could be with other people, but also be able to have some therapeutic relief, have some mental health benefits to it. I think we all spend a lot of time eating or cooking, and food is, cross cultural. So I thought about how I could use the act of cooking and eating, which is a time when most people are really relaxed. You're open to good conversation. You're not in a rush most often if you're with other people, and how that time can be multifunctional. So yes, we all eat every day, might have dinner with our families every day. But how can we use that time to still address some of these issues and have some of these hard conversations? And that being an easier vehicle through which people are mindlessly sort of talking because you're in the middle of cooking or eating, but still able to be vulnerable, to be open and to be present with other people.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love it. That is so wonderful. That is so creative. And as you're saying those things, I'm like, yeah, I do tend to be a lot more relaxed when I'm sitting. I have time to sit and enjoy the food. And there are very much times when I am able to cook and I do feel relaxed. Maybe I have some music playing in the background and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
What's the name of your book?
Yes. It's called A Palette for Love. And
Ooh.
before the pandemic, when I was able to meet with people in person, that was a Instagram show that I would do every Sunday, that I keep meaning to restart, but time is, always in a scarce supply. But every Sunday I would cook something and also discuss a mental health topic. And I would have different guests that were in different industries come on to talk about, their form of therapy and their idea of self-care and healing, and provide some psychoeducation about things like suicide prevention, living with addiction, couples work, infidelity, self-care, self-improvement, a wide range of topics.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Onyx has some things in the work for the spring. And I would love for us to get a couple copies of your book, or maybe even for you to come down. I know you're up in New York, but for you to maybe come down to DC and do a little project with us. We have something
Sure, I
in the
love
works.
DC.
And
Hmm.
isn't it fun? This is a
It
fun place,
is.
isn't it?
It is. I used to live in Alexandria, Virginia, so I was in DC quite often.
Oh yeah, you just right over the bridge from me.
Hmm.
Okay, that's what's
Yeah.
up. That's what's up. So going right into your practice, I know the name of your company is Sankofa, right?
Correct. Sankofa
Yeah,
Marriage and Family Therapy.
perfect. And Sankofa is an Ndinkra symbol, right? Originating out of
Yes.
Ghana and the Ivory Coast. So tell me more about your experiences with the word Sankofa.
I was first introduced to the mythical bird of the Sankofa bird back in my PhD program. And I just love the idea of the Sankofa bird, if you've ever seen it. I'm sure, and I know you have, but if anyone else has not ever seen it, it's a bird that's flying forward but looking backward with an egg in its mouth. And the idea behind it is using the best of your past to inform your present and future. And I thought for Black people that was so relevant. And because of our history of slavery in this country, and needing to recognize and acknowledge the impact of being a Black person in America, and how much of what we go through presently and will go through in the future is informed by our past in this country. And I thought about how I approach therapy, which is always to investigate a person's past. How did you get here? How did your problem get to where it is now? What things have worked in the past and tried to relieve it? What things haven't worked? Because I think that we all have these inherent abilities to get to where we want to be in life, but sometimes we get stuck or we get sidetracked. And so I think my role as a therapist is one of facilitating, a person on that path between where you want to be and where you are now, and reconciling the things from the past that may be holding you back or negatively impacting you or even positively impacting you. I think that our ancestors gave us more blessings and talents and capabilities than they gave us trauma. But we do have a traumatic, situation and position in this country. And so wanting to acknowledge both parts, but also look at it in a very hopeful and empowering way, and not just focusing on the traumatic pieces of it.
Yeah, I think it's so powerful that you said that when you were describing it, describing the Sankofa bird. I was also thinking about, yes, how even for the bird to fly means that they have some of their own strengths, right? Like even for them to be able to move.
Correct.
A lot of times when people come to therapy, they're coming and they're thinking primarily about deficits, or they're thinking about problems or issues that are,
Right.
but it also becomes our opportunity to help them identify their protective factors and help them to identify their strengths and help them to identify their
Hmm.
coping mechanisms. Because a lot of times we take those things for granted. We take for granted that we are strong. And in order to get to this place today, we have survived. And what have we used in order to survive? And yes, there's an issue that's present and there's some challenges that we're experiencing, but we also have a lot of strengths in us. And as Black people, we don't always get to highlight those strengths, right? Because we're constantly being
Correct.
socialized to see ourselves in this negative deficit kind of light, this comparison that doesn't allow us to
Right.
shine as brightly. So I definitely love how you are incorporating Sankofa into your practice, and not just into the practice, but into your mission, your vision, your values, and your daily interactions with your clients. I love Ndinkra, right? In fact, I have an Ndinkra tattoo myself. I have Jinami, which is
Okay.
God reigns supreme. And funny enough, I got the tattoo while I was in grad school. I was like, my doctoral program, as a matter of fact, I have it on my wrist because, when we're in our doctoral programs, we're typing all the time. So I was like, I need a
Right.
constant reminder of God. And I was like, I'm gonna put this right
To
on my
stay
hand. So
focused,
every time
right?
I'm talking, listen, because God, you wanted me here. I didn't choose this
Right.
program and God, this is what you told me that you needed me to do. So hold me down, God. And every time I
Right.
look at it, I definitely feel
Right.
connected. So when I saw the Ndinkra, I was like, yes, come on, Dr. Henry with the Ndinkra. So tell me a little bit more about the Black romantic relationships, because you're a marriage and family therapist, right? And so
Yes.
we talked
So it's go ahead.
just a second ago, you talked about slavery and Blackness. And we weren't able to have fulfilling relationships consistently during that period of our ancestral history, right? Tell me a little bit about what that means in your work and how that shows up maybe in some of your clients, and then how you approach it.
So the marriage and family therapy profession, I think it's a misnomer. People always assume that my clients are only couples or only families. In reality, most of my clients are individual people. And the marriage and family therapy field is not so much about the love or familiar relationships as much as it's about our approach to giving therapy. So as MFTs, we focus on relational systemic therapy. And that means we want to know, even if my client is an individual person, who are they, who do they belong to, who raised them, how do they identify in the world, how do they interpret interactions, what are all the systems that they're a part of, so their family of origin, their family of creation, their friends groups, work environments, and how their treatment issue shows up in all these different places and spaces, so that when we give them solutions and we help them solve or resolve their problems, we're applying that same idea of them being a multifaceted person to that solution. It has to work for all parts of you, not just the part at home or the part at work, right? So we try to think about things in what we call a postmodern way, which is not pathologizing. Of course, we have to diagnose for different purposes, but not looking at the person as you are a depressed person, but rather you have depression or you're living with depression. So we're taking it outside of the person's being and away from their identity, and more so making it something manageable that they're just living with or carrying with them, that they can then be in different relationship to. When it comes to Black people and thinking about slavery in this country and Black people who were enslaved, I think that's where the adversarial relationship between Black men and women began, because of the dynamic established in slavery, that Black men couldn't protect or provide for their family or their loved ones. Black women were dependent solely on the slave owners for shelter, for food, for anything at all, really. But you also had these brilliant stories of resilience, of Black men who were enslaved walking miles and miles to see their families into plantations, of couples marrying anyway, even though it was illegal to marry when you were enslaved, and the ways in which Black people who were enslaved tried so hard to maintain some semblance of relationship and of family and of belonging, and how that was a survival tactic. And I think for Black people currently, it still plays the same role, right? That Black love is revolutionary. Black love is sustaining. It's a beautiful thing, but there are a lot of barriers and complications to Black love being realized. And not so much by Black people, I think by everybody else, right? Because Black people don't couple the same way. We may not marry to the same numbers, but we still have the same long-term, meaningful, dynamic relationships that other races have. It's just not counted on a census in the same way, let's say. So I'm part of my mission as a person and professional is really to debunk this idea that Black people don't want love or don't want commitment or don't want relationships, and to really provide some psychoeducation to the couples I work with around this Black love being something that is centuries old. It's something that our people have done forever, and we found a way through the most adverse times to maintain and sustain that love. And how can we, as we discussed earlier, call on some of those strengths and some of those coping skills to be able to implement it now in the present and future. So with every person I treat, regardless of their race or ethnicity, we discuss that racial identity. We discuss their culture. We discuss, what their family traditions or customs might look like. And with couples, especially, even if they are a Black couple, Black people are not a monolith. We have all these different ethnicities and cultures and identities within our racial group. And that means something. We can't just think, because I'm a Black therapist and you're a Black couple, we know everything about each other. We might be able to see each other in different ways, but I still have to understand what being Black means to you. How does Blackness show up in your work life, in your couple? What does it mean to be a Black couple of any configuration? And not only looking at, monogamy or heterosexual couples, but looking at Black love being what it is and the different ways it can be manifested.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There was a couple of things you said and I was like, yes. You meet another therapist and you're like, say it for the people.
Right.
So I got real excited. So let's start with what you said around marriage and family therapists. So you said that your primary clients are not necessarily couples or families, that a lot of them are individuals. Why do you think? Well, I know, right? A lot of people just see the title, they see the credential, or they see the degree, and they automatically think that they have to go to that they have to be coupled to come to you. So, what is something that you think the field can do to help individuals know that they can also come to marriage and family therapists?
I wish so badly we can change the name of the profession because I think
Okay.
that would go a long way in helping people realize that it's not about coming as a couple. But I also do love
Yeah.
couples work. I primarily identify as a couples therapist because that is my preferred population, especially Black couples. But I think the field can do better at being more visible. If you ask a person, who do you go to for mental health services? They're probably not going to name a marriage and family therapist in any
Right.
realm. They're going to say maybe a couples therapist or marriage counselor. They might say
Yeah.
psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker, even. But I don't think people know about MFTs. And so
Yeah.
part of my personal professional mission, again, is to make the marriage and family therapy field as visible as possible. I want everyone to know MFTs exist and provide mental health services. And in my very biased opinion, I think that we're the best suited to deal with couples and families because our training is focused on that relational dynamic from day one. We talk about, how do we get people to communicate differently with one another? How do we get people in these bonds of family or marriage or romance or friendship to honor that relationship in a way that works for both people? How do we get people to realize that maybe this isn't working for both people? I think people often think coming to couples therapy means we're here to save our relationship. And I tell them right away, that's not my job. My job is not to keep you together. My job is to help you realize what your dynamic is in a very raw and real way. And then have you decide, do you want to keep this dynamic? Can you change it? Or is it not something that is going to work for you long term?
Yeah, yeah. You know what's funny about that is, of course, I am a therapist, and I always advocate for people to go for therapists to go to therapists.
Absolutely.
My therapist is an MFT, and I love working with her because not only is she a great therapist, but her approach consistently requires me to think outside of the box because I mean, I've been doing this thing for like 17 years, right? So I'm understanding my core beliefs. I understand,
Right.
my defense mechanisms. I understand all of that kind of stuff. But because of her approach, it always helps me to think about who I am through a different lens. And so I specifically wanted somebody who was not an LPC in not in that traditional kind of way, because I wanted somebody who was going to challenge me. So I do also value that individuals can benefit from working with an MFT as well. You made a statement. You said, as you were describing how you approach the work, one of the things you said is, I like to work with people and help them. And I asked the question of, who do they belong to? And I think about that question, that statement as you made it, because we tend to be communal people and we tend to want to belong. And the lack of belonging, or the lack of believing that we belong, can have its own implications on our mental health,
For
right?
sure.
And sometimes we belong to people. Sometimes people believe we belong to them and we don't want to, right? And sometimes we want to belong to people and they haven't accepted us. Tell me a little bit more about that statement. Like, who do you belong to? How do you ask that question to a client? And what are some kind of answers that you typically get?
I usually ask the question of who's in your support system, or who knows about this problem, or what do your friends and family think about your depression or about how you behave when you're anxious. And it part of that is an attempt to, ask an open-ended question, as we are all taught to do as clinicians, right? And then the other part of it too is to get them to say, oh, well, I don't have friends, or it's just my mother and I, or to have them tell me who is around them and who they see as part of their circle. And then from there, we can ask questions about, the missing pieces of it, or what was it like for you growing up as just you and your mom and your brother? Or how do you think your life would have been different if your grandmother was still alive, or whatever the case is? So when you think about who do you belong to, I think about it as in this person's ideal place of functioning, of what we call their homeostasis, in their most positive way of being, who else is a part of that? Because none of us exist in a vacuum. Even those of us who are single or alone or only children or the last of our bloodline, we have people around us that matter to us. And like you said before, part of that tension might be those people don't show that we matter to them, or those people don't acknowledge us or come around as much as we'd like them to come around, or those people are inaccessible because of some tension or conflict that's unresolved. All of that is a part of what a person's going through. So when a couple comes in and they say, we have this infidelity that we're dealing with, I always want to know who else knows about the infidelity, because most often it's a secret. And that secret keeping then compounds the tension, and it makes the pressure around this couple to maintain the happy face on the outside even more damaging to them and behind closed doors. So knowing the people that you can draw in to maybe even attend a session, or the people who they might turn to for advice or for resources, it all plays a role in how this thing is playing out. It shows who's influencing them. It shows who they're trying to, impress or keep in good graces, or who they're trying to take care of, who they want to protect. All of those things, again, play a role in what's happening that's causing this tension. Most people come to therapy when they're at the bottom of the barrel, right? When they're struggling beyond belief, when they're frustrated, when they need something desperately to change, and they didn't start there. So I need to understand that journey and who was a part of it, and who can help them remember, the things they learn in therapy, who can help them stay on task, who can they avoid to avoid this thing worsening. And people don't always think about things in those terms, right? Because they're not therapists and they're not trained to do that. But once you start having those conversations, they're able then to make those connections on their own. They're able to then understand themselves better. And I think that serves them when therapy is over, because therapy is supposed to end in most cases at some point. And so when it's over, how can you maintain these changes? Who can help you maintain them? And who do you need around you to remember who you are and how you want to be functioning?
Yeah. You know what? You are taking me to school, Dr. Henry. I'm sitting
Oh, stop. You know all this stuff.
Well, it just reinforces how much the wording of questions matter, right? Like how we can say a question one particular way, but if we change one of the words or we emphasize one of the words, how it stands out differently. And I think that's what's so important about therapy, because most people will say, I talk to my friends, or, I journal and I do this, and all of that is wonderful. All of that is great. But therapy is important, because sometimes you hear a question a certain way with a certain emphasis on a certain word, and then it makes you think, outside of your normal box. It challenges you in so many ways. Speaking of that, one of the things that I hate seeing are these new t-shirts that say, it says something like girls trip, the new form of therapy. And I'm like, don't say that, right? Because that's not true. Stop saying that. And it's always sister girls wearing the shirts. And I'm like, stop it, people. Like, we got to stop thinking that we can replace therapy. Like, therapy is in addition to, or maybe even the foundation of your experience. And then you add in these other things as well. One of the other things that you said, speaking of that, right? What you just mentioned, you talked about sometimes people along the idea of belonging, that sometimes they may be alone, right? I come across clients who can oftentimes, especially in this area in DC, and I'm sure also in New York, who have too many people in their circle, right? Yeah. And that subsequently causes some issues for them. And then we, of course, have to get deep into it. Like, what is your thought process around these, having this many people? And oftentimes it's a protective factor, because they think it's a protective factor rather. Right. But tell me a little bit more. So it's quite obvious that some people who may be alone may suffer from certain situations and have a diagnosis. Tell me about people who have too many people in their support system, maybe too many people that know the details of their life. So they don't have secrets, but they have everybody who knows everything. Tell me what you think about that.
Well, I think, like you said, it's definitely a way of protection, but I think it's also a way to deflect, right? If you're so focused on everybody else, you don't have to focus on yourself. You don't have to look at, you know, how you're actually doing. And I think that what, in my opinion, what always makes a client in the very beginning have like somewhat of an aha moment is this idea of how are you really doing? Meaning, how are you functioning, right? Because we all, I think, are very good at keeping the ball rolling, going to work, going to school, taking care of our kids, you know, going to dinner with friends, even, and thinking that we're okay. But when you ask a person, how are you really doing? And I ask the client, what are you eating every day? How often are you eating? How often are you sleeping? Are you able to get up and shower and take care of yourself? These are things that to us might seem like, oh, of course people do that, but some people don't, and they don't realize that that means that you're not functioning well, right?
Right.
So if you can't even tell me that you eat every day, or that you're able to sleep, or that you're taking care of your basic needs,
Yeah.
that plays a role in how you're functioning. And so for a person who has thousands of relationships or thousands of friendships and family members and all these different things, and you ask them, what did you eat today? And they can't answer, it kind of turns a light bulb on of like, oh wow, I'm not even taking care of myself. And
Yeah.
so you have to pull back all those layers around what is the function of these relationships? How much
Yeah.
are they giving back to you versus how much you're putting out into them? And I
Yeah.
always tell people, if you're a giver, you have to have limits because takers won't have any, right? And
Right.
so it doesn't mean that you have to end all these relationships. It does mean that you may have to give you to yourself. You may have to give all the things you're giving other people to you, and you might need you in that way. And one of the things people don't often think about is, how are you talking to yourself about yourself? What are the
Yeah.
words that you're using to describe yourself? What's on that ticker tape that's running through your mind every day about who you are and how you are? And how do people around you reinforcing that or contradicting it? Right. So
Mhm.
one of the good things about someone who has a lot of people around them is you can send them back to those people and say, you know, ask the people around you to give you three things about you that they love,
Yeah.
or three things about you that they think you can change or work on, or ask the people around you last time they noticed that you were happy, or they noticed that you smiled, or they
Yeah.
last time they saw you cry, right? And so that these people can serve as a mirror to your client. They can serve as a sounding board or reference point. These are people you can say, you know, to give them a list of things that they see you not doing, to then call your therapist or tell you to go back to therapy. They
Yeah.
can serve as a baseline for you of your functioning. So if your friends or clergy members or family see that you're not doing X, Y, and Z, they can tell you, hey, something is wrong. Because you may not realize it because you're in the midst of being and doing all these different things.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm working on a project right now with a university, and we're talking about assessments. And what you're describing are those informal assessments, right? A lot of times
Mm-hmm.
people think that psychological assessments are always the formalized ones, right?
Yeah.
Where we're
Pen and
taking
paper. Yeah.
exactly, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
not even computerized, right? As opposed to
Mm-hmm.
what we get to do in these informal assessments that come through the questions that we ask, or even in these situations, the questions that we get to ask others about us. Because,
Right.
there's this idea that we know ourselves better than anybody else does. And I have some thoughts about that, right? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? But the fact is that we still see ourselves generally through a very linear perspective. And when we get feedback from other people that are in our village, it kind of broadens how we're able to see ourselves and broaden what we
Right.
want to do and not do with that. And therapy becomes that safe space where we get to formalize the question that we're going to ask to people in our lives, because sometimes people don't even know how to ask their friends, what do you appreciate about me, or what are some areas that I can work on. Sometimes they're just not able to ask the question. They just don't know how to.
Right.
They don't know how to even enter into the conversation. So, yet another way, another reason that I love therapy. You
Mm-hmm.
kind of talked about this, but I wanted to ask the question again because it's one I've been really thinking about, uh, which is, so many folks in our community were raised to believe what happens in this house stays in this house, right? And you touched upon it a
Mm-hmm.
bit when you talked about infidelity, but there's a lot more that happens within our house that's not as traumatic as
Right.
infidelity. but it's something that affects us, something that shifts the way we think or shift the way that we do something. Tell me a little bit from the Black perspective, what happens in this house stays in this house. How does that generally impact Black romantic relationships?
I think it's twofold. I think on one hand, it can be a protective factor because it allows for the couple to keep their relationship sacred. And I do believe very strongly, as a married person, but also as a person, that you have to keep something for yourself. You have to keep some part of this, intimacy, I think is a part of that too, right? Is keeping something close to the chest. I also think it can be harmful because then you're trying to solve all these problems on your own. And you can't possibly fix what you never have gone through before. You can't know what you don't know. And so if you're the first person in the family to get married, if you're, this is your first time in a long-term relationship or in a serious relationship, how are you possibly supposed to know how to make it work or how to keep it going? And oftentimes in the Black community, but I think overall too, we fear judgment, we fear shame, and we fear people talking about us or telling our business, things like that. And that happens, you can't avoid that. It's inevitable in some respects. But I also think that having a core group of people that you can rely on, and I think these people can serve different purposes. So you can go to different people for different things, right? You don't have to go to every single person for everything. But if you have a friend or two or a relative you can turn to say, hey, we're going through this thing. What do you think? Or, how does this sound? Or am I the crazy one? Or, am I wrong for this or that? I think it helps us to broaden our perspective. And hopefully those people are able to give us somewhat of an objective response that allows us to see ourselves and our partners differently. And hopefully, we can feel safe to be vulnerable. And that's really the biggest thing, is the safety of it. And so I don't advocate for having a panel of people that weigh in on everything that happens in your relationship. But I do think that both of you individually and as a unit, can have different people that you turn to for that feedback, or at least for, that listening ear. If they don't say anything helpful back to you, it's just to unload and get off your chest and to say things that maybe you're not ready to say to your partner, or you don't want to trigger or, re-injure your partner by bringing up, but you still need to process it. Therapy, of course, can serve that purpose very beautifully. But I think beyond therapy, you still need other people who are invested in you and your partner to serve that purpose.
Yeah. I love that. It made me think about some of the relationships I was in, in my younger years, and how I've always had a core group of friends that I process things with, because I truly value that kind of village approach to problems. And I remember being in a relationship with people and they didn't want to tell their friends what was going on, either because they didn't want their friends to judge them, or they didn't want their friends to judge me. And I was like, but if they're truly your friends, they're probably not going to be judging. They're probably going to really want to just be helpful. But then it makes you think, do you judge your friends when they're telling you stuff about their lives, right? Needless to say, it didn't work out with those people, because I'm sitting here trying to broaden my perspective and work on our relationship, and taking time to think about what's going on with me, and asking my friends and my daddy is my confidant about certain things. And meanwhile, this person is trying to figure it out by themselves, and it's just not working, right?
Right.
It then makes me think, so what kind of things should stay private between the couple, and what kind of things are okay to share?
I think that depends on the couple. It depends on how comfortable you are with inviting people into your romantic relationship in that way. I think it depends on who you're sharing with and what that dynamic is, and then what you can trust the other person to do with the information. So, I think that, like, I have a friend that my husband and I can both be on the phone with and say, okay, we had this argument. What do you think in response to it? And she does the same thing with us and her husband. But we also have our own individual relationships as well. So I think it's really about, you and your partner agreeing on what things you want to keep extremely private between the two of you, and then what things you're comfortable with having other people weigh in on. I don't think that there is a set rule of never share these things, never share those things. I will say the rule should be around who not to share certain things with,
Yeah.
right? Who
Oh,
can't handle having this information, who it may be harmful to share these things with or open up to in that way,
yeah.
and respecting how both partners feel about this person and what information is or is not given to them.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love that. So it's not about who to share as much as it's about who not to share it with. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. What are your thoughts about couples having couple friends? You know, I think about different relationships that I've had, and in some relationships, you know, we just all of our friends were maybe individuals, or they were in relationships, but we didn't all meet together and hang out as a
Hmm.
couple. What do you think about a couple having that special couple, that couple that they lean on and that couple also leans in on them? You think it's a good idea or not so much, and things like that?
I don't think it's a necessity. I think that you can have single friends who offer the same sort of support. I think it's again about that individual person or those people and what their capacity is, right? Because some people may have been in their own disastrous relationships and are unable to be positive or to be productive in a conversation about your situation or any situation. Some people are always going to be pessimistic. Some people are always going to be on the train of you're better off being by yourself, leave him, girl. You don't need that trust in your life. You know, some people are always going to be on the train of stay together no matter what, and that can be unhealthy. So it's really about knowing who to go to for a particular problem or particular kind of feedback that you want. And whether that person is single or in a relationship, you know, it really is about how objective they can be and how well you feel like they can see and hear you and your partner or your issues and be able to give you feedback that makes sense and that works for you.
Yeah. 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 I hear a lot of great things. I love talking to you. We might have to do this more.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
I also hear that some of this stuff is what I hear a lot of folks say. And I'm constantly thinking, but how do we move beyond that? Right. So some people say, I'm not comfortable sharing my business. And so subsequently they don't, and they're
Hmm.
suffering in isolation. Or some people may say, who's gonna talk about me behind my back, right? And so again, they don't say much. I'm wondering, like, where are these solutions though? Like, how do we really get our people, specifically our people who are being
Right.
conditioned to not talk, to get them to actually talk, especially about relationships? Because we know that there's so many people who are experiencing mental health challenges because of attachment or the lack thereof, right? and,
Hmm.
and when we talk about it from socialization, we even talk about it from, you know, in the 60s and 70s, um where people's financial support was getting cut off if a male figure was living in the home, right?
Yeah.
And to
Hmm.
your point, people are not always married, but they could be coupled, and how that breaks things up. And so now you can't even say that daddy is at home, right? Or now you can't
Right.
even say whatever. And so we're constantly holding these secrets, and we're saying it because we say we hold these secrets because we're not comfortable. But what we also know as therapists is that out of discomfort comes change and comes transformation. We have to be uncomfortable at different points in our lives. So, yes, we believe in homeostasis and we support homeostasis, but there's times of which you have to evolve. How do we really get to the solutions? How do we really get people to identify who they can talk to? How do we get people to identify where they can get the support? How do we get people to understand what should be said, and not the limits, but where there's abundance, like where there's
Right.
something positive? What are your
Right.
thoughts on it?
So one thing that I love that has been happening definitely since, you know, the last year and a half, but I would say maybe the last 5 or 10 years, is that there's been this sort of national focus on mental health, right?
Yeah,
More than I think ever before, at least in my lifetime. And that can be a very
yeah,
limited source of information, but I think that I love seeing celebrities or people in popular media talking about mental health and going to therapy and how therapy has helped them and helped them transform their relationship or themselves, whatever the case is. I think that helps to normalize it a lot, right?
yeah,
Like even some of the podcasts I love listening to, they talk often about their therapist, what the therapist says, or that kind of thing. And so I think it helps people who may not think of therapy as a possibility for them see how it helps others, and at least are open to the idea of getting feedback. Second one way of transformation, of seeing, oh, well, if Jay-Z goes to therapy, I can go to therapy, right?
Yeah.
Alternatively, I also think that there are a lot more accessible methods of mental health help. I don't want to call everything therapy because everything is not therapy, but I do think that a lot of things can be cathartic and therapeutic in that way of helping you cope and helping you get through a rough patch. Whether or not that means you don't need therapy afterwards is yet to be seen. But I do think at least having that first shift occur can be really transformative for a person long term. So there are some people who are never going to buy into the idea of therapy. They're never going to want to go to a therapist, never going to be comfortable with it. And I think we have to also acknowledge those people and understand their positions, because what we're asking the person to do essentially is to give up the way they've always been functioning. We're asking them to risk their most sacred thing, which is comfort. And we know as clinicians that people get comfortable even in their chaos. And that's still something worth acknowledging, because if this is how I've gotten through my life to this point, I'm taking this humongous risk now to first label as something that's possibly unhealthy or harmful to me, then giving it up, right? And then trusting this other person who doesn't know me, this complete stranger, to give me the tools or what I need to fill that void. And that new thing being equally as effective and reliable as my old way. And that, I think, is what makes therapy the most absurd idea ever, right? I think therapy is the weirdest thing, next to something sending kids to school. The weirdest concept ever. I think school's a very weird concept as well. But you're sending your babies to strangers for 8 hours a day. It's mind-blowing that we do this every day. But but therapy is just like that, right? You're going to a stranger, you're giving them the most intimate parts of your life.
That's right.
And you're then coming back the next time. So you're like, oh, here's all of my, drama and all my trauma and all of my bad stuff. And then I'm going to come back and hope you don't judge me. Hope you don't make me feel worse than I already do. And hope that at some point I feel better. And therapy often feels worse before it feels better, especially couples therapy. So now you have this person going through life, going to therapy, thinking, okay, I'm doing the right thing. I'm going to therapy, but I'm still not feeling better. It's not working yet. And the idea of therapy being a process is even harder for people to grasp, because it's like, no, wait, I came to therapy. Now fix me, right? How many times have you heard fix me from a client? And they're waiting and wishing and just, desperate for that change, that relief, really. And so I can never fault a person or a client for dropping out of therapy, for not coming back after the first session, for getting angry at me and storming away, or saying forget this and I hate you and this isn't working, because it's really, really rough and it's really, really hard, and there's no guarantee that it's going to work. I tell all my clients that therapy is not always the answer. It's not always the answer at this time in your life. I'm not always that person for you to be your therapist, and so you're taking all these gambles. You're gambling with hoping the therapist isn't one of those bad therapists that we all hear about and may even know, that do harmful, unethical, terrible things that we go in the group chat about. You hope that this person is going to be available to you and attentive to you, and not have their own stuff go on that's going to impact them being able to be your therapist. So there are all of these dynamics at play, and you're hoping for this really perfect storm of events that leads to you feeling better and functioning better. And that's a lot, right? It's a lot for even those of us who are trained to do this work to even go to therapy ourselves, because that's scary as a therapist to go to therapy.
Listen, because you don't know if they're going to Google you and find out what you did. You know what? Let me not make this about me. Let me not make this about me. Yes, I understand.
No, I feel the same way. It's scary. I remember going to therapy the first time being like, wait a minute, what am I going to say to this person? And I'm a therapist. I have no clue what to say. And I have no idea why I feel so uncomfortable and so, nervous about therapy. So imagine a person who's not a clinician. Imagine a person who's just simply trying to get through life and wanting to, do this thing that their culture is saying not to do, Their
Right.
friend is saying don't work. Their family's saying Black people don't go to therapy, we go to church, you know,
Yeah.
and not even having that support of, you know what, you're trying to take care of yourself. I see that and I appreciate that. A lot of
Yeah.
people don't even have that. They come to therapy in secret and they hide
Yeah.
it, you know. So it really is difficult. I'm really in awe of my clients all the time. And once a person is able to get that benefit that we know therapy can provide, I think there's no going back, right? It's like
Yeah.
once you get that first taste, that's it. Now you're hooked
Yeah.
forever. And that's
Yeah.
when it works in the best sense. But there's so many alternative outcomes that I think it makes sense that people are very gun shy about therapy.
Yeah. 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 You know, you said something about it sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. And I mentioned that to clients too, and I make the comparison to the gym, that you want to get to a particular image,
Mm.
right? And it may be a weight loss, it may be strength, it may be
Yeah.
curves, it may be tone, whatever the case may be. But that after that first exercise, that first day in the gym, you're sore,
You're
your
like, oh
body
no.
hurt. You're like, what did I do? And why did I do this? And I
It's
paid
just
the gym
easier to
money.
be, yeah, it's easier to be out of shape. It's just easier to keep
Listen,
eating and
Chris,
let it happen.
I'm gonna just go
Right.
do my thing over here, and I'm gonna let the Lord take His course. You know, and let the Lord handle this right here. But then you stick to it, and you start to see the results, right? And I love to say that with my clients as well. Last thing before we end, they tell us, I don't know who they is, but I like to say that, right? They tell us that we as Black women are only 3% of doctors in the United States. It's just a few of us. And of course, in our general society, there's a small percentage of people who are doctors. And then within that percentage of doctors, there's only 3% of us that are Black women. Tell me about what that means to you. You are a young, beautiful Black woman doctor. What are your experiences like with that additional identity of being Dr. Henry?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for saying young. That helps a lot.
You got it. You got it.
You know, it's being a Black female with the title of doctor is a trip. It can really be a trip. I'm in a group practice here in my community, and I'm the only Black person there, the only Black therapist, staff member, everybody. And we have no pictures in our waiting room or anything else, right? So clients are assigned based on specialty or availability or whatever else. And one of my favorite things to do is come in the waiting room and say, oh, hi, I'm Dr. Henry. Because there's always reaction. There's always a reaction. Whether the client is Black or not, there's always a reaction, right? There's like a double take. Oh, I think it's you. You know, that's what they're thinking, right? And I don't know. Sometimes it's my race. Sometimes it's me being female. Sometimes it's me being young. Who knows what the reaction is? There always is one. And I love that so much. It's my favorite game to play with new clients, is see how much they're going to react, right? Because they're never expecting a Black female doctor. And I'm the only doctor there at that. So, yeah. So, you know, it's so many things. On one hand, it's great because being visible empowers and inspires other people. I've come across so many Black women who aren't doctors, aren't therapists, and will, in whatever way, learn my title or my profession and be like, oh, wow, I'm so proud of you and I'm so happy you're doing this thing. I don't know these people at all, but it means something, right? And that's what I sort of feed off of and hold on to and embrace and sort of like fill my tank with. But then there are times like being in academia where being a Black female doctor works against me, right? That there's from the students to administration, me being young and female and Black is a problem. I don't belong there in their minds. They don't want me as their teacher, their supervisor, their colleague. And I've been in some situations where they've made that very blatant and very clear and very verbal, right? And so I think it's important to have, and I'm so thankful that I have a circle of colleagues who are Black female doctors who, you know, work in different walks of life and different industries, and who I can call, say, girl, this thing happened, and they understand and they get it and they
Yep.
see me and they can help me heal and recover and get back to being me. And that's
Yeah.
always so important. And I tell all my students, especially my Black supervisees who are females, to find your people, find your community of
Yeah.
colleagues in this work, because you need those people. I couldn't
Yeah.
survive without my
Yeah.
circle. Being a Black female doctor is something I've always wanted to be. And I set out to be as a very young child. I was going to be Dr. Henry no matter what happened, whether it was a physician or academic, one way or another, we were going to work that out. And it's something that I think gives me a different platform with which to reach Black people, that
Yeah.
even people who are not Black, who may not like the fact that I am Black, me being a doctor might smooth it over for them, right? It sort of balances the scales in their minds, like, oh, she's that kind of Black person in their head.
Yeah. Yeah.
It makes people listen to you differently and respect
Yeah.
you differently, or take what you have to say more seriously because of that title. And it's a
Yeah.
shame that you have to have that title to get some people's attention,
Yeah.
but in having it, you can then use that avenue to reach them in a different way, and to
Yeah.
still convey your message to people that may have closed their ears to you because of being Black or female or whatever else. So it's definitely a gift and a curse. I think it's, of course, more of a gift than anything else. At least I focus on the gift part of it more than anything else. And
Mhm.
I think I tell everybody, anybody can have a PhD. It's not anything special. Anybody
Yeah.
can do it. It's just a matter of finishing it, right? Of doing it. That's really what it is. It's a fight against yourself. It's you
Yeah.
versus you. Is how I felt in my program.
Yeah.
And it's not because I'm super smart or because I like school. I hate school, but I want to have a PhD. I wanted to be in this field. I wanted to be a Black female doctor that other Black girls and boys can look at and say, wow, I can do it too, because they can.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I relate to so much of that. I think I'm gonna have to get a group of Black women doctors together and maybe do a spilling the tea, right? Because there is much tea
Yeah,
to be spilled when it comes to
things
being
people would not
Black
believe.
woman and then a doctor, because again, it's another small identity. It's a small
Hmm.
group of us, right? We're
Yeah,
small as Black people in this country, small as women and things
right,
in this country. And I'm talking about numbers, not in terms of
right,
space, presence, or
right,
anything.
right.
And then the doctor piece even more so. There was so much you said that I completely relate to. I know that we have to get out of here. We done spilled all the tea, honey. People know all the information now, right? Tell everybody how to get in contact with you, or how to learn more about your book, how to learn more about the work that you're doing, how to support the work that you're doing. Tell them about you, girl. Tell them about you.
So my business again is called Sankofa Marriage and Family Therapy. On Instagram, it's Sankofa Therapy NYC. My email is the same, SANKOFA Therapy NYC. I need to do better about my social media presence. I've been very lazy with it lately, but I plan to get back. I plan to to post more often and to be more interactive. My book is on the website. It's on Amazon as well. And yeah,
Perfect.
that's
Oh,
it.
I have had so much fun with you today. And
Me
I know you saw
too.
me nodding and stuff. That wasn't just
Yes.
my good clinical skills. I was really into it. I was like, yes, I get. Oh, yeah, I'm writing notes.